Hi, I am delighted to be here today for DASA Connect 2023. I'm Dr. Kelly Gurley, and we are going to talk about the characteristics of the new generation of digital leaders. So I get the amazing opportunity to serve as a digital transformation leader at Takeda Pharmaceuticals, where I head up the operations to help ensure that we are looking for the best innovative items across the globe for the way that we operate at Takeda from an initiative perspective. So I have tons of experience working with a lot of our DevOps teams and our technical teams to help drive that type of innovation. So today on our agenda, I want to talk a little bit about the different types of change that we see in our day to day. Some of the barriers of those changes, opportunities where we can create more psychological safety with our teams, and effective communication to help support change. So, in preparing for this talk today, I felt it was so important for us to hear what our other global industries are saying about change. And Gartner in 2022 said 89% of board of directors say digital is embedded in all business growth strategies. And I thought that was really impactful to know that it's at an 89% level. When we listened to CIO.com, one of the things that they talked about is when there is a lack of effective, consistent communication, digital transformation efforts often fail or do not garner the adoption that we hope for from an IT industry. We have to collaborate within the entire organization, that type of cross functional collaboration to ensure that everyone is moving towards a good and successful digitation. So when we think about the different types of change, we have some of those changes that are at the transition level. And then we have some of those that are more transformative. So when I think about transitions, it's more of the smaller changes within the groups or processes within a bigger transformation. And the transformation is something that is a lot more holistic, that are going to involve much more cross functional teams, and it's going to have larger impact to the organization and how the organization functions. When we think about change as humans that are sitting through those changes, sometimes we ourselves forget that when we get as leaders to sit in those rooms where we get to hear about things that are coming frequently, and sometimes many months, if not a year or two, before the regular folks or the folks that are going to be impacted by the change get to actually hear what's happening. So sometimes that causes the folks on the floor, right? The folks that are a little bit closer, that get that feel that impact, to feel fair with the change because maybe they're not hearing as much as you do. So there's a couple different schools of thoughts there, but we have some folks from MIT that did some great studies in terms of understanding how individuals see change and why they may potentially stop from adopting a change. And the three concepts they came up with is this idea between failure to see, failure to move, and failure to finish. So when we think about failure to see, it is that opportunity that we get as leaders as we sit in these meetings, that we get to actually see that vision. We're part of those conversations. We're sometimes driving that vision creation. So we know what it looks like. When you run a race, at the end of that race, there is a finish line, right? So you actually know no matter how hard and how long it takes to get there, you know at the end of a race, there is a finish line. I'd like to challenge leaders to think about how can you help your folks that are going to be impacted by the change actually have that visualization of what it looks like towards the end. When they are finished with that change, what does that mean? How does that feel? What are some of the success outcomes? How can we create a narrative that helps others visualize what it is we need them to see that the change will deliver? That would be one piece of the change and the change methodology that I would like to empower leaders to help build in with their teams. The other one is around failure to move. Sometimes people get into these change cycles. And again, change is one of those constants that we see from a technology perspective with everything that's going on. And change on top of change on top of change sometimes does create a version of change burnout where people are just really tired of the change that's happening. How do you keep them motivated? How do you keep them moving through the change? Creating these opportunities where you're listening to them, you're hearing, you're giving them feedback, you're giving them rewards, you're giving them the praise, and you're championing the change effort alongside with them, knowing that it is difficult at times to continue these changes when you do feel that bit of burnout. So, as leaders, this is an opportunity for us to dig a little bit deeper and remember the humans that we're working with and find good strategies to support them along the movement of change. So, creating that visualization at the beginning in terms of what they need to see and what this change will look like, and also helping them move through the change through motivational techniques. Then the final piece here that sometimes does create this barrier to change is this failure to finish. So you've shown them what it looks like, you're motivating them through it, and then somewhere along the line, they just don't adopt it. And as a leader, this is where it's difficult because we do want to create the adoption that we need by ensuring that the teams feel that motivation and understand what it is. So when you get stuck at the last juncture, that's sometimes where the teams just need that extra push and that extra motivation to help them get to that finish line, bringing them back to what they saw in the beginning, that finish line, what those outcomes look like, the success that they will see at the end to help them through the last push to get to the end of this version of change that you're working with them on. When teams don't feel that they are part of these changes, it does lead to a lot of mistrust. A lot of times they feel that as leaders, we don't think, about how it is going to impact them enough, or that we don't understand, down to the details and the real world that they're living in. And then changes have been made without bringing them on board. So this is where we as leaders need to continue to bring them in to these types of changes and giving them opportunities to feel heard, to share where they're having challenges, and to create opportunities where we can help remove some of their roadblocks and some of their fears. A lot of times people just sometimes don't feel heard and they feel a bit stuck in a new change that's happening without their understanding, or another change that's happening without understanding the details of the work. And these are the things that create this opportunity where people have that mistrust. As a leader, we've probably heard in different scenarios this idea about bringing in psychological safety and what that looks like, because it has been proven that it does increase team performance and it does improve employee engagement when teams feel safe and have those opportunities to speak up. And as we think about the DevOps world and the culture that we need to bring in, it's so important for us as leaders to ensure that teams are engaged, right? In order to build this high performing team that we need. And it's valuable to lean into this opportunity where we can create more psychological safety. So as I think about the DevOps culture, right, it is this practice of bringing the teams together. Most important, it's bringing the teams together. It's broken down into several different axes, right? When we think about the culture component, right, but we think about the collaboration that is needed alongside the process and tools to help create that version of togetherness in the way that they need to work together. And it should promote this version of true communication, honest, direct, and frequent communication, collaboration, and transparency. And I wanted to focus to talk today on communication because I really do believe, and I've seen in my practices, that the more I spend the time communicating, along the way, I will create that collaboration and I will create the transparency, which ultimately leads to this trust and creating this space where folks feel heard and they have the psychological safety where they can speak up. Because I can only do better if I know what's happening. I can only remove roadblocks if I know that they exist. And as a leader, it's important to me to allow my teams the opportunity to have those direct conversations. So Aristotle said, in when you think about communication, I love to pull this quote, right? Tell them what you're going to tell them, right? We talked about that, right? Seeing, tell them, helping move them through, and then tell them what you told them. So that at the end of the change, which we talked about, this ties right into those three barriers to change. They know exactly what they should have encountered. So we're going to talk a little bit about clear communications. It's so important to meet the teams where they are. So remember, I started off the conversation today with you about being in the room as a leader and hearing about concepts, thinking about vision, building those visions many, many months before a team sometimes even sees the impact of a change. How do you meet that team where they are, right? They're being impacted by something that you know and you know well because you've had those opportunities to have those dialogues and get the clarity. How do you create that space for them? And at the level that they are, knowing that they don't have the background, how do you create a space where you can connect to the information or processes that they already know? People tend to tie new information with existing information. That's the way our brain works. So if you know that you're making changes to something that they are doing, is there an opportunity there for you to show them this is what you do today and this is what it's going to look like tomorrow? So then that way they're making those direct ties to things they already know so that you're meeting them where they are and you're helping evolve them. The use of storytelling techniques, right? It's so difficult in this virtual world that we live in where some folks are hybrid, some folks are fully remote. Some of us get the lovely opportunity to still meet in person. But how do we share information in a way that connects to the other people at the level that they are at, in the unit that they are serving? If I'm talking to a business partner, I have learned many, many years ago that I cannot use technical speak unless it's somebody that has a technical background. I'm going to lose them and they're not going to be able to connect in directly into what I need them to do or what it will look like. So, how can I change my narrative to meet them more where they are? How can I bring them on that journey through great storytelling techniques where they're bought in and they're understanding where I want to go and why we need to partner together? There are opportunities for me to do that. Some of the formats to really create that clear communication, it is sometimes being able to connect face to face. There are some opportunities where we live in a virtual world and we could still be on camera. So I can still see if somebody has that question on their face that maybe they're not asking or where they seem puzzled. And I can lean into that and just ask, if they need a little bit more clarity. Creating spaces where we can answer questions. Sometimes it is that I'm delivering a change and that may not be the forum where I'm actually able to connect and answer more deeper questions, but I need to find the time or the space and the resources to meet people where they're at and answer those questions that they may have in order for them to make the connection to this new change process or different type of culture sometimes we're trying to change and reinforcing that you want them to take on. Combining verbal with nonverbal. This ties back into how people learn. It is important sometimes for people to get an opportunity to read information ahead of time. Some people, this is how they learn, and they actually need that in order for them to take in new information, and also giving the opportunity to share and hear, because some people they learn more from an audible perspective and they actually want to hear you share the idea, not necessarily just read it, but also be able to have that. I love this last bullet point that says do not rely purely on email. I have been in many conversations with folks that said, yes, we have communicated. And then I ask, how have you communicated? And then they say, oh, we sent an email. And I'm always asking, was that received? How do you know that what you've sent out has been received by the audience and they understand exactly what you meant by that email? That's when I get the silence because that's hard. You send an email out, you are sending it from the context that you understand. Even with great change managers, it's still important for us to connect in with the audience and ensure that whoever we're sending these emails to have received it in a way that's actionable to them at the level that they're at, in the mindset that they are at. So it's super, super important. So to not rely, your only form of communication cannot be that you've sent an email, especially when we start thinking about transformational type changes. And we're going to move on a little bit to talk about this consistent communication. This is the piece that drives that transparency and collaboration. When you think about setting something up for the first time, maybe a big cloud migration, that where you're moving many of your apps into the cloud, or maybe it's transitioning from one of your major applications into another that's going to impact many different employees and different roles. What are some of the first things you should do? And I felt like it was important for us to get a bit more tactical here, making sure that people understand the scope. It's so important. What is this going to do? And what's the scope and the breadth? Why is this important? You don't want for your scope to not be somebody else's scope where they think that you have missed them because it just wasn't in your scope. That also leads to some versions of mistrust, and that's what you don't want. It's important to the organization, but why? Why is it? What is the risk of not doing it? Why is it important to them? People need to hear it again from their mindset. So you have to be able to spin the narratives in ways that people understand. What are the expectations of them? And who can they ask for questions? These are the things at the beginning as you start communicating about this change that's happening. You want to ensure that all of the groups, all of the impacted groups are hearing these things. They understand why it's important to them. They understand what the expectations are. And over again, creating spaces where they can ask questions. Going through the change, you do want to spend the time to celebrate. A lot of folks feel that it's like it's great to send an email that says thanks, but it's also even better when they get those emails from personally from the higher level leaders in the organization that recognize the work that has gone in. So ensuring that you're celebrating what's working well, ensuring that you get an opportunity to listen. Spend the time with the folks on the ground, right? The folks that are being impacted, and give them that safe space where they can share what's working and what's not. Because as it's the things that are not working, you as a leader could now dive into and create processes around it, or help remove their roadblocks in other ways. Discussing new outcomes. If timelines have to change, giving them that, making sure that it aligns with them, that they hear it, and creating opportunities to get that consistent feedback. And then as the organization gets to be where it's more transformed in this new area, celebrating again what went well. Giving folks that opportunity to celebrate at the finish line at the end of the race, where they're like, yes, I made it, right? I finally ran my first marathon and I made it. That's a celebration moment. Pause, reflect, give them that time to just celebrate, right? But also dig in to what are lessons learned here. How could we have been better as a cross-functional team? Are there other opportunities where we missed the boat in connecting to users that were important to this process? What can we do differently, and how do we evolve where we are? So this consistent communication with the teams just continues this dialogue, so that folks don't feel like something happened and they don't even know it ended and nobody got celebrated, and then they're moving on to something else that's going to happen. You want folks to have this opportunity to share in these celebratory moments. And as a leader, this is where it gets hard, because some leaders are on the opposite side where it's just more of a do as I told you leader. But those leaders tend to not be able to create the psychological safety that we're trying to encourage, especially when we think about what we need from a DevOps culture. You do want to lean into your own emotions. Maybe you do have your own fears. Maybe some things aren't clear to you. That's okay to share that with your teams, but it's good for them to hear how you process that. But you know what? That's really not as clear to me. That's a great question. Let me take that back and come back. But when you say that, now you need to remember to come back, right? Because you're building this trust. And creating the empathy as well is so important. Being vulnerable as a leader is so core to how your team see you and how you show up. creating that transparency when you have those conversations with them. Some things you're not going to know, and it's okay to not know everything. Your teams don't expect you to know everything. As a matter of fact, that's why you hire them. Most of us hire people smarter than us, right? Because they're the subject matter experts. So it's okay that you don't know everything, but let them see how you're processing it, because that creates this synergy where they feel safer as well to have these conversations with you, sharing how you really feel, finding ways that you can welcome and champion the change as well, because you don't want to lead them down a path where it's negative, because that is not healthy for you or healthy for the team. But you do want to lead them to a space where they can see how you're processing it and how you're welcoming, this new idea or this new change. Even if sometimes you feel like things may not work, that's okay. It's sharing that with them, making sure that you are creating a safe space for your teams to come to you as well, creating that environment to listen to how they're really feeling. And I always tell leaders, ask to understand. There are times where, as leaders, we just know. So we ask to respond. So we almost want to respond before they finish their thought. And it's so important to take that moment to pause and just listen and hear how they're feeling, and find ways where you can coach them through the feelings and let them get to the other side on their own versus you just telling them what they need. And as a leader, that's where, leaning into it and creating these spaces for your teams is super important. So this was really insightful and really fun to be able to chat with you guys about. When I think about where we're going and all the amazing, what do we say, 85% of leaders said it is digital change coming in every business. When we think about that, we have to create spaces for our teams to feel safe. We have to be able to create a space for our teams to feel heard, right? And creating more psychological safety by remembering that at the end of the day, you can change your processes, you can change your tool, but if you don't change your human, you're not going to have the adoption that you need. And they are your most critical part of your change journey, right? You think about any type of digital change, you need your humans. You think about process change, you need your humans. So this is where it's so important to lean into that and remember, as a leader, this is your guide. Your guide should be, how do I help my humans? That's my North Star. Adopt this change, see this change, see why it's important, value the change, feel motivated to go through the change, and ultimately celebrate with us that we've had this amazing journey together. Whether there are hiccups in the road or not, that's not the point, but the point is how we do it together. You think about your DevOps team and the way that you want them to work and creating this synergy and bringing them together. And as a human leader, you have to take into that consideration that you are leading humans that are going to help you have the success that you need and transform your business in the way that you need to. So I encourage you to think about your human as your North Star and think about the way that you can impact them, that you can help them along the change journey, and that you can help lead them into these new transformative ways that we're working in our DevOps technical environments. Thank you so much for having me on today. I hope that this was helpful and that it renewed your energy and spirit as a leader to continue to lead humans. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you.